Hello, my name is Robbie Steinhouse, and I'd like to talk a little bit about this model, the logical levels, created by Robert Dilts. I will explain the model very quickly, but tell a story about something that happened to me in the past, where I met someone who very quickly became a very effective salesperson. And I will share that story with you, but firstly I will explain the model. So the idea of the model is at the level of environment and the outside world, people notice information. They can see it, they can smell it, they can hear it, and so on. That comes in through their eyes, and often they will behave in a certain way from stimulus outside. It's called stimulus response. The reason people can behave in certain ways is that they have developed capabilities or skills. So at some point in their past, they chose to become, let's say, good at catching. That's something of a skill they required, throwing a ball against a wall or something like that. And once they chose to develop that skill, they could then manifest the behavior in the environment. The thing that often can influence somebody to want to develop a capability is when they talk about beliefs and values. Why do they think something's important? Why do they think something's valuable? And those questions are often quite personal. Often it's something in the past. So for example, if somebody had a very positive experience with sports in their childhood, they may identify, say, I am a sports person, and then they would have a group of beliefs and values which would align with that identity. If you believe you are a sports person, saying I am a sports person, you would then have a group of beliefs and values, which would be something around the idea that sports are very valuable and you believe them to be absolutely essential. With that, you'll be motivated to develop the capability in the outside to be able to do that behavior in the environment. So let me tell you the story about this gentleman I met. Years ago, I went on a presentation skills course, and I met a man with a kind of short cropped beard. He was quite tall, slightly ill-fitting suit. I asked his name. He said he was Chris. It was in a training centre in Birmingham, and I said, what do you do, Chris? And he said, well, up till now, I've been an engineer for the past 20 years, 2 teenage daughters, I live locally, and I thought I'd give up the engineering job and have a go at sales. And this is, in fact, strangely enough, my first day on this course. So the camera was rolling, and for any of you who are familiar with presentation skills training, the idea behind it is you film somebody giving a presentation, they then kind of do a bit of a botched job of it. You watch the film, and then somehow the person is ashamed and embarrassed in front of the group, and then magically, supposedly, their presentation skills will improve. Anyway, with Chris, he got up in front of the camera, and I think to everyone's shock, he went, "If you don't buy this computer, you will suffer a terrible, terrible pain." And his presentation in this rather kind of aggressive way was a little troublesome, a little kind of problematic. And I think we were all a little bit shocked. Anyway, I went up to him and I said, tell me, Chris, what do you do? What is your sort of hobby? And he said, well, actually, I believe, in a certain sort of higher power. It's a thing that really motivates me. I said, okay, great. Anyway, a few months later, it turned out that Chris became the most effective salesperson in the organization. And I couldn't believe it. It was a huge company, over 1,200 salespeople across the UK. It's a global business, and he was doing so well. How was it possible that he developed not just the success from the behavior, but also somehow developed the capability so quickly? He had been an engineer all his life. He had no background in sales. So I was fascinated, and NLP is often about modeling. If you find somebody who's brilliant at something, how did they do it? So even though I was young and I knew nothing of NLP, I asked some questions. Firstly, I asked him his own opinion. I said, tell me, Chris, what is it that has made you so successful? And he said, it is because God has put me in NCR and God has blessed all of their products. So this answer was one that sounded, to me not particularly convincing, but there was something really important about it, and that's the top of the model, the idea of vision or spirit. Once you have a sense of purpose, the ability to connect to something bigger than yourself, you are in some ways capable of almost anything. Famous quote by Nietzsche is, he who has a why to live can cope with just about any how. And Chris was used to operating at that level of vision. So that certainly was one amazing sort of feature. However, I was a little curious about, did he really believe this to be true about the product being blessed? So I kind of challenged him a bit and said, you know, he was selling something. It didn't seem that ethical a thing to do, to kind of sell a product which was extremely expensive, especially if some of the owners of the companies that he was selling to were, I don't know, pension funds with potentially retired or people who were living, you know, on a sort of low income. So I said, did he think there was any moral dilemma here? And he was quite a pious man, and he did look a bit perplexed. But then he kind of blurted out, if I have to choose between those big companies and sending my children to a private school, I'm going to choose my kids. So in a sense, I think that possibly, like many people, he valued his own family, and that was possibly the thing that drove him. But also, he did have that sense of operating at a higher level. Finally, I saw Chris, and he looked a bit down in the dumps. I said, what's wrong? He said, oh, I just sold a big computer. And, you know, oh. And I was puzzled. I said, what do you mean you've just sold a computer? You should be happy, Chris. Most of the salespeople are delighted when they've sold a computer. They go off to the pub, they have a drink. I said, what's going on? He said, well, every time I sell a computer, I know I've got to make hundreds of phone calls and send out thousands of letters. And from that, I'll be lucky if I get 10, 15 meetings. And of those meetings, a small percentage of them will be in the market, and even smaller percentage will actually want to buy from us rather than IBM. So I know I have a mountain to climb if I'm going to get another customer. So what was it that made Chris so effective at sales? Now, often I ask that question and people make all sorts of ideas. It could be that, you know, he had in some sense his beliefs that enabled him to develop the capability very quickly. It could be a sense that he didn't have an identity as a salesperson and that didn't get in the way, or he had a sense of purpose or vision. There are many reasons why he was effective. I think I would phrase it that it is the saying by the famous British academic who was a great influence in the foundation of NLP, a man called Gregory Bateson, where he said, what is the difference that makes the difference? For me, it is that Chris somehow managed to deal with the rejection of the sales process in a different way. Most salespeople who are rejected over and over again, as he described, somehow find that prospect of just continually working and pushing, suddenly their energy drains. But because Chris was used to operating at a higher level, even though it still hurt him, he somehow managed to stand away, not to take it quite so personally, not to take I'm being rejected, although it was still clearly hurtful to him. And I think that was the difference that made the difference with Chris. Thank you very much.